You know, in looking for solutions to the crisis in Gaza, you sometimes stumble upon a proposal that's so different it just makes you stop and think. We're going to break down one of those today, a really unconventional perspective from one speaker on YouTube that he calls the Yogi's solution.
So his entire argument really kicks off with this one simple but powerful metaphor: oil and water. For this speaker, this isn't a problem you can solve with a treaty or a negotiation, no. He sees it as a fundamental incompatibility that is never, ever going to change. And that one core belief, well, it leads him to a pretty radical place.
So what is this oil and water problem exactly? Well, the way the speaker frames it, you've got two formidable enemies who are just locked in this struggle. And in his view, the only way it can end is with one side, or maybe even both, being eliminated.
And what's really interesting is his take on how this conflict isn't just contained over there. He argues it's spilling out everywhere, right? It's creating these deep divisions all over the globe, turning social media into a total battlefield, and pitting friends and neighbors against each other.
And all of that brings him to this point where he says, look, we have to call a spade a spade. He's calling for what he sees as just cold, hard honesty. And from his perspective, that means you have to admit there's a huge power imbalance. He concludes that the Palestinians are up against a very strong enemy that, simply put, is not going anywhere.
So, this very pragmatic, maybe even cynical, assessment is what leads him to his central, and I mean very controversial solution: migration.
He actually calls his solution simple. So, okay, if you start from his premise that this is an unwinnable fight against a much stronger foe, what do you do? What action could you possibly take to just immediately stop the violence and save lives?
His answer is just one word: migration. We're not talking about a ceasefire here or a two-state solution or any of the things you usually hear. Nope. He's proposing the mass relocation of the Palestinian people.
Okay, so what would that actually look like? Well, the idea is for Palestinians to voluntarily leave and become refugees in Western countries. He specifically names places like Europe, the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand as their potential new homes.
And the number one benefit of this, in his view, the most important outcome of such a drastic plan? He says it's purely humanitarian. It would instantly put a stop to the violence and save lives. Specifically, as he puts it, the lives of innocent women and children, who he says are the main casualties. Now, this idea isn't just a political or military strategy. The speaker, coming at this from his own Muslim perspective, actually grounds his entire argument in a very specific historical and religious event. He points directly to the life of the Prophet Muhammad for a model. He talks about a key moment in early Islamic history, the hijra, or migration, and says that is the blueprint for what he believes should happen today.
And here you can see the exact parallel he's drawing. On one side, you've got the situation of the Prophet and his early followers in Mecca. They were facing a much stronger, hostile force, and they were being persecuted. On the other side is how he sees the situation for Palestinians today. So just as the Prophet was instructed to migrate to Medina, he argues that Palestinians should make the choice to migrate now.
And this is a point he really hammers home. He says that historic migration wasn't an act of cowardice or defeat. No, it was a necessary tactical retreat. It was a move they made because they were weak, and it was designed to preserve their community so they could live to fight another day.
So, let's say this happened. What comes next? I mean, beyond just stopping the immediate fighting, what are the so-called promised outcomes of taking this path? Well, according to the speaker, the benefits for the individuals who migrate would be immense. He lists things like peace and solace, actual physical protection, plus better medical care and education. He also says they'd get access to services and privileges they could never even be able to dream of right now, ultimately creating a much better future.
Okay, and this is probably the most critical piece of his entire argument. He does not see migration as the end of the story. Not at all. It's just step one, retreat. Go abroad, get educated, build strength. That leads to step two, return. Once there, in his words, strong enough, they come back. And that leads to step three, victory. He claims they could then annihilate the enemy very easily, with minimal fighting, just like the Prophet's eventual triumphant return to Mecca.
So this brings us to the core tension of this whole proposal, doesn't it? This idea of retreating in order to advance. Is giving up your land today really a viable strategy for taking it back tomorrow? The speaker basically boils his whole philosophy down into this one phrase: retreat and be civilized. He's trying to reframe the choice. He says it's not about fighting versus surrendering. It's about a destructive, unwinnable war versus a strategic withdrawal that's designed to save lives and build for the future.
And so we'll leave it there, with a central question this whole idea forces you to think about. If you strip away all the emotion, is a strategic retreat, modeled on a 1,400-year-old precedent, actually a viable path, not just to temporary peace, but to future strength? It's a pretty provocative thought.